You're listening to the Ask Drone U podcast. You ask, we answer your drone questions. Whether you're here to turn your passion into profit or you simply fly for fun, we're a community of learners and teachers who aspire to achieve greatness. We are
Drone U.
In this week's episode of Off the Record, we discuss what's going to happen in the future of the drone industry in 2020. What will happen with regulations? What will happen with remote ID? What will happen with recreational drone law? All that and more on today's episode of Off the Record. Joining me today in the studio is, as always, the Flying Dutchman on this week's episode of Off the Record. My name is Taken Flight, or at least that's my call sign, and I'm really excited about these new segments of the Ask Drone U podcast. Just a quick reminder for everyone, these shows are really more focused on in-depth, going down the rabbit hole, going super deep on topics that we believe are relevant and may not actually be discussed or may not be widely known. We're trying these out on our initial platform. That could change in the future, but we really want to get your guys' feedback, guys and girls. You know, what are you thinking? How can we change this? Do you like it? What are your thoughts? So let us know. Just leave us a review wherever you download the show, whether that's on YouTube, on Spotify, on Google Play, or on Apple Podcasts. Wherever you consume the show, don't be afraid to leave us a review or a comment and let us know what you think. All right, Flying Dutchman, let me ask you, which do you want to hit first? Remote ID? You want to hit the Drone Security Act? You want to hit hobbyist drone law? Or do you want to hit the UTM?
Let's do the Drone Security Act, and let's get that one out of the way real quick, I think.
Okay.
This was launched, like a month ago, I think. The American Security Drone Act of 2019, as promoted from both people in Florida as well as Connecticut. I have to look up the exact names. But anyway, if this passes, if this bill becomes law, it will prevent any government agency of using federal funds to buy drones made in countries that we do not want to do business with, which would include Chinese-made drones. So only for federal money. It doesn't mean that you couldn't buy a Chinese-made drone, but you cannot purchase it with federal money. Now, I think this whole proposed bill is a sensational bill. I think they're just looking for attention, and they want to play off the fact that DJI has been under fire recently when it comes to data security. DJI has come up with a number of solutions. We know that government agencies have created their own workarounds as well. So I don't really think that data security is that much of an issue anymore at this point. However, these guys want to jump on the bandwagon and come up with this American, I keep forgetting the name, American Security Drone Act. I think it's really ridiculous. I don't think it has any legs. I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
I think you actually summed it up really well. You know, the Americans as a whole are concerned with security from DJI, but like you said, there already is an alternative government solution to work with DJI drones. So when we saw the Security Act come out and say that, they would just buy the government edition of DJI and that would be okay, it's kind of like, okay, guys, this law doesn't really make sense because you're saying don't buy DJI drones, buy DJI government drones. But forget the fact that our security agencies have already created this other way to use DJI drones. So it doesn't really seem intelligent whatsoever. It seems like just a cumbersome way. It seems like a cumbersome way to really waste a bunch of money. I honestly don't think that this will come to fruition either, Haya. And the reason that I think it's not going to come to fruition is that this would absolutely murder the industry as a whole. I mean, not just the federal agencies, not just, the states and local departments purchasing vehicles under grants or under federal money. This doesn't really just cover federal agencies when you have so many municipalities and localities utilizing federal funds to purchase equipment. So, I mean, this would really have a huge impact overall. And frankly, I don't think that it's going to become a problem. And I would also say this is that, I think that until there is a competitor to things like the Phantom, this would really set back a lot of agencies that are saving lives with drones. In addition, I did find this little caveat really funny. I was talking to someone about the Drone Security Act, and they were mentioning 3D Robotics is trying to comply with these provisions, and they're coming out with ways to comply with your drones have to be American made. So what 3DR says is, you just buy a site scan and buy our drone. And because SiteScan is American, that breaches the I don't even know what the percentage is of American made parts versus foreign. And now it's American. It's like no guys, no. Software is really country agnostic. It can go anywhere really fast. You know what I mean? So I thought that was really interesting. But just to move on from the Drone Security Act, I would say my prediction is no.
It's a no-go, I'm pretty sure. When we were at DJI Airworks and we went to a training facility of the LA Fire Department, one of the reporters in the room actually asked that question, like, hey, does this Security Act against drones, would that have a negative impact on you guys and your operation? And the fireman from the LA Fire Department said, it would be disastrous. It would be a terrible thing to happen. And that's just one fire department. I mean, if you look at how many first responders, firemen, police forces are using drones from DJI, to no longer be able to buy those kind of drones with federal money, I think will be a massive setback. And I don't think it would do anybody any good.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Well, let's move into the next piece of 2020 and drone regulations. In fact, there's probably one more thing I want to discuss, so I don't want to leave it alone. But I want to talk at the end of the show about drone delivery. We have all these people operating under Part 135 as an air carrier, which is completely outside of Part 107. And at some point, I think the FAA is going to have to essentially come to a head and say, look, you can't do 107 and 135. It's got to be one or the other. So I think I'd like to talk about that. But before we get to that, why don't we go ahead and hit remote ID? Because in the last show of Off the Record, you mentioned remote ID. You mentioned that, every conference you go to, you're just hearing people, remote ID. Yeah. And why? Well, I think it's because a lot of people see remote ID as the next catalyst to really use drones autonomously and really create that next wave of the American industrial revolution. And let me give you a quick visualization, a quick example, right? We have Amazon has taken over online shopping and consumerism, but Amazon's been having issues just like DJI as soon as they added these third-party sellers from other countries. So hitting that 2-day shipping mark can oftentimes be very difficult. And I think it's taken the consistency of Amazon down. At least that's what I have noticed empirically. Now, with that said, imagine this battle between Amazon and stores that have a physical footprint, right? Brick and mortar stores. How can brick and mortar stores compete against Amazon? Well, if UPS, which just launched their air carrier delivery service, had something like a drone port on the top of a mall, for example, right? That could deliver packages from brick and mortar stores to consumers in the local area, now you solve all the problems that Amazon has been looking to do. Fast delivery, right? When it comes to clothing, now these people have trust in these brick and mortar stores. They typically understand what clothes fit and what don't. So you're going to have a little bit higher trust value. In addition, you're helping small businesses all over the country compete with a multinational conglomerate like Amazon. That's an industrial revolution step up. Why? Because it's how do I say this? It's economies of scale, because you're adding such levels of efficiency that's affecting productivity on a wide mass macro scale. That's when you truly have these shifts in culture. And I think remote ID could either be the KPI for having a turnkey solution, or it could literally be the dud, I forget all the, what is it, the old cars that didn't work very well. The Ford Tremor, I forget what it was called, the Pinto. I think it was the Pinto.
We never had that in Holland, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. My mom had a Pinto, and I'll never forget the horror stories. So, but just saying, I think remote ID, in a lot of people's eyes, is the key performance indicator for the success and growth of the drone industry. Do you agree? And do you think we're going to see remote ID in 2020?
A lot of good points that you bring up. I mean, I know going from to all these different conferences like the FAA Symposium, DJI Airworks, and other shows as well, is that every safety panel or any panel that talks about these kind of things with drones, they always talk about remote ID, and they bring up, what is it, the FAA calls them the clueless, the careless, and the criminal drone operators. from a security point of view, they want to be able to know who's flying a drone, where the drone is going to, where the pilot is, and they want to be able to identify that person. So in that sense, drone ID is important. What you were talking about with...
Drone ID is important because it would allow for enforcement?
Also, yeah, for sure. But also where you were going with the conversation about Amazon and UPS, if you want to be able to fly drones commercially on a larger scale beyond line of sight to do drone deliveries, you need not just drone remote ID, but now you're talking about an UTM, like an unmanned aircraft management system, basically a traffic management system. So I think remote ID and UTM in that sense are closely related. The problem with remote ID is that it seems to be the first barrier that needs to be broken in order to move forward with the drone industry as a whole, both for recreational and commercial drone applications. However, what we have seen is that remote ID keeps being delayed, and I think it's been delayed now 2 or 3 times already. The latest one says publication date now is December 20th, 2019, and then the end of the comment period would be February 1st, 2020. It remains to be seen if we're going to meet those dates. And if we don't meet those dates and it gets pushed back another 3 months, then are we going to see this in 2020? I don't know. I mean, I hope we do, but
that's a great question.
It should have been here in 2018 already, or 19, I mean.
Yeah, I heard this quote from air traffic controller in Denver one time. He said, if the FAA says there's going to be a law in a year or 2, what they're really saying is it's going to be here in 3 to 5 years. So I agree with you. I don't think we're going to see remote ID in 2020. Like you said, it's already been delayed.
So, but here's the mismatch, right? I mean, you have legislative processes that take forever, and you have a drone industry, which is a young industry with many players that have tons and tons of money. I mean, think of Google, think of Amazon, UPS. I mean, those guys have the funds to make stuff happen. So you have a very fast-moving industry with a lot of new technology. I mean, going back to Skydio again. So there are plenty of technological breakthroughs and possibilities, but we're being held back by the legislative process that just can't keep up.
Couldn't agree more, Haya. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think like Airbnb, people are just going to keep pressing the waters. They're going to operate anyway, and they're going to let the FAA catch up. So I think that's what's happening. Exactly. It's what's happening right now. Look at Part 135. Everyone says, okay, FAA, you don't want to allow for drone delivery. You're going to like regulate it out. Yeah. We're just going to use Part 135, which is, manned aviation. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take that manned aviation and every single thing that you ask for in manned aviation, like how, are there seatbelts in the captain's chairs? And you just say, this aircraft does not have captain's chairs, thus seatbelts are not needed. NA, you know what I mean? Not applicable.
I think that's exactly the process UPS went through to get to where they are right now.
It's just that the sad part is they paid a bunch of Beltway bandits a stupid amount of money to figure out very simple things.
Yeah,
so,
and that shouldn't be necessary.
Agreed. Yeah. Can hire us. Well, just ask the question on the show. We'll help you figure it out.
Try for sure.
Yeah. But, you bring up a good point, too, that remote ID is kind of the stepping stone to the unmanned aircraft system traffic management.
Yeah.
And, again, if we're going to be having drone deliveries, if we're going to be having health deliveries, if we're going to be having, let's say, imagine if there was a drone, Haya, that could go out and do accident reconstruction, crash reconstruction, map an accident scene, and then just fly to the next one, map it, cellularly throw up the data into the cloud, and process all these accident scenes for state police in real time.
And open up the road much faster again for traffic.
This is the world that we are coming to.
Well, and all this technology is already out there. I mean, we're not talking fairy tales or what might be in the future. Things like these are already happening. I mean, take a look at the company Zipline, who's flying all those blood samples and vaccines in African countries. Yeah, I mean, they fly in an environment where, one, the drone makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you have very hard to, or areas that are very difficult to get any transportation going. It's hilly, it's muddy, you have a lot of rain. It takes forever to get from A to B, even though the physical distance is really not that far. So you use a drone, you get those packages delivered in 15, 20 minutes. Fast and easy. So the examples are there, the technology is there. Why is this not happening in European countries and in the US on the same scale? It's because the legislative process is just behind.
It's because people act out of fear and they're afraid. I think it's an interesting parallel to how America was the first to flight, but the Wright brothers sold their first aircraft in France, right? They didn't sell it in the United States because of all the regulation coming down.
Already back then. Oh boy.
Exactly. And so now we live in America, the most industrialized, wealthiest nation in the world.
Yeah.
And we can't do drone delivery here, but we can go to Africa, And we can do drone delivery there, and Africa is probably the furthest behind of all continents. And yet here we are utilizing this advanced technology to keep people alive, to have a convenient way to deliver medical supplies and drugs as a whole. And you know what, Haya, the interesting parallel here is that while Africa doesn't have a lot of doctors in rural areas, neither does America. And yet we still are our own worst enemy in the fact that we are regulating ourselves out of ways to make people's lives better.
Well, sometimes being behind is actually an advantage, right? I mean, you can
100%.
skip all the mistakes and you skip a lot of the development and processes that you have to go through. Look at the African countries where they never had large-scale telephone lines deployed, but they jumped right into cellular and mobile phones. I think with the drone world, it's the same thing. Because they don't have the same legislative hurdles that we have in the US, they're able to use the technology, show that it works, and kind of leapfrog us and just be ahead of the game already.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, but this is an African country that doesn't apply to the US. It does apply to the US. I mean, if you go to the Northwest, North California, and even further north, there are areas where you have a lot of islands where you need ferries to get blood samples and vaccines from A to B. And it takes hours. Whereas again, with a drone, you probably do that trip in 20, 30 minutes and you get the package delivered.
Yeah.
So
economies of scale, my friend, the more efficient that we can become, the larger effect that we have on the economy as a whole. And I really believe that, that presidents and administrations are going to stop using immigration as a way to build the economy, right? What's the fastest way to build the economy is have new money come in and being spent here. And America is 70% consumerism. So it really begs the question, what's the other way that we can actually grow the economy? And the only way that we can do that is by providing systematic efficiencies at multiple levels across industries as a whole. I mean, that's really what an industrial revolution is. Now, that being said, remote ID, it's supposed to be, the key for UTM. I don't see it happening this year. And I think the bigger issue, like you said, remote ID is supposed to take care of what did you say?
Careless, clueless, and criminal drone pilots.
Careless, clueless, and criminal. Yeah. People are probably only clueless because they want to be criminal. But that being said, it's interesting because you have DJI who just launched their FPV goggles. And I know, you were there actually. Yeah. Do you remember the Airworks conference before it was a conference? They had it at the W Hotel in DC and they showcased...
that one I wasn't.
Okay, so at that conference, they showed Aeroscope. And in that presentation, because I still have it, they said, this Aeroscope will be able to see DJI drones. It'll be able to see other drones operating on these frequencies. And in time, it will be able to see FPV racing drones. And we're like, there's no way that you can do that with FPV racing drones. Well, you launched DJI HD Connect and you utilize the same system with Mavics and Phantoms. And now every FPV racer can be seen on Aeroscope.
Yeah.
So how do you enforce that? Then you create remote ID, and anyone who's broadcasting without a remote ID and not acting within the law makes it extremely easy for an FAA official to have 50 people to visit per day, write out tickets. It also makes me wonder, and this is something I wanted to discuss as well, is the FAA really even going to still be regulating the drone industry, or do we see the adaptation of a new federal agency that just deals with unmanned vehicles? Because look, the FAA is already tasked to the nth degree. They're already short people. They only have 15 people that can enforce in the whole country. I mean, that's not scalable. That's not plausible. The only thing that's going to do is take more and more power away from the FAA over time when the government realizes that they may not be able to fulfill their agreements. Now, I think the FAA is doing a very good job. They've gotten so much better.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But with recreational lance, it's actually slowed things down, and here we are again. So will we see a new federal agency that will actually be the overlying body and control of drones as a whole?
It kind of makes sense what you bring up, because I think, I forgot the exact numbers, but I think there's already a much larger number of unmanned aircraft in the national airspace here in the United States than there are manned aircraft. So you would think if you look at the FAA as an organization, that means that the drone department should be growing really, really rapidly, and they should be facilitating the actual growth of the unmanned aircraft in our airspace. I think remote ID is a big stumbling block in that sense, and I hope they're going to be resolving that in 2020. But if you look at the track record, it's highly doubtful, and it remains to be seen, unfortunately. There's one more thing I wanted to bring up. During DJI Airworks, that happened, like 2 or 3 weeks ago now in LA, DJI brought up that worldwide 279 people's lives have been saved with the use of drones. Now, that's not just the US, it's the whole world. Imagine if you are able to deploy drones on a much larger scale, how many more people could we save their lives, or help at least, if we were able to do that?
Well, I mean, we're trying to create systematic ways for people to do search and rescue, because one of the biggest issues is not the tool, it's the person using the tool. And they think like, oh, I can just go out here willy-nilly and just search for stuff. No, you can't. You need a systematic, comprehensive means of doing it. You need an autonomous software to look through pictures, because your eye gets tired very fast. I mean, like you said, you could really be saving a whole lot of lives just with the education of how to use existing tools. But there's something that you mentioned just a minute ago. You asked a very important question. You said, how many aircraft are there versus drones?
Unmanned.
Last time I checked in with DJI, there were 8 million drones in the United States. Okay?
Oh, there you go. How many manned aircraft?
213,375.
So there you go. That kind of tells you everything you need to know right there.
So it really begs the question, should Congress just apply funds to create a new federal agency? Trump already created the Space Force. This could be next.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a part of the Space Force.
Well,
Who knows?
It doesn't have to be outside of the FAA, but I mean, these numbers show that however you structure it, the department that deals with drones and unmanned aircraft should be of a pretty decent size. Yeah.
I've got a new name for the new agency.
Go ahead.
FUAA.
Off the record?
It is off the record because it's Federal Unmanned Aviation Administration. I'm totally going to get I'm totally going to get phone calls about that. For sure. Okay.
That's a pretty good one. I have to give it to you.
Okay, so remote ID.
What was the name again?
FUAA. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen with recreational law? Hobbyist drone, we say hobbyist, FAA is like recreational. Okay, you win. But what do you think is going to happen? Do you think everything's going to work as planned?
No, I think the biggest stumbling block, or the biggest opportunity really is what you should say, is in education. I mean, we've seen already in Germany that once you start educating drone pilots, they become a lot safer and they do a lot less stupid things with unmanned aircraft. I think if you're talking about recreational drone flyers, you don't need to make things more complicated. I mean, having a knowledge and a safety quiz, I think, is a great idea. Forcing people to go through LANs, in an ideal world, that's probably a great idea too. But if you don't teach them, you don't tell them, you don't inform them about LANs and how to use it. And we spoke to a number of drone hobbyists when we were filming in Manhattan, right in front of the DJI store. When you say LANs to a hobbyist drone pilot, you get this blank stare back.
No idea.
Yeah, no idea. They don't know what it is. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go to find out. So
we haven't launched that show. Yep. We haven't done anything with that footage. My favorite quote from one of those interviews was, "America has drone law?"
Yeah.
You remember that? Like, I was just like sitting there like,
really?
Are you you're joking, right? Like the one of the most complex advanced economies in the world, you don't think has laws on flying robots?
The US, you
Come
betcha.
on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, but I mean, if you go back to recreational drone flyers, hobbyist drone pilots, whatever you want to call them, to make the biggest headway, I think in 2020 would be educate those people.
Yeah.
I think that's the first thing, and probably the only thing you need to do in the first year.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot of topics here. We've covered 2020, the future of drones. I remember one time there was an article about the future of drones, and someone said, we're going to see this huge shift to enterprise, and all the drone service providers are going to go away. Yet the exact opposite has happened. Enterprise companies are having extreme difficulties scaling. I mean, this is why we're launching our enterprise programs, because we want to solve those problems. But in addition, we're solving other problems to make drone service providers more valuable and aggregate data on them, because we're seeing more and more companies looking for drone pilot networks with extremely qualified applicants to fulfill jobs.
Yeah.
it's the I feel like even though many people wanted everything to go to enterprise, we are still seeing the power of the drone service provider.
Yeah, but it's also early days still. I mean, during DJI Airworks, one of the things that DJI kept bringing up is that, hey, we made this Phantom drone, which really was supposed to be a flying camera, if you will, for photography and videography. And then you have all these first responders and enterprises and companies using this same drone for things that it was never intended to be used for.
True.
So DJI's been playing catch up, trying to come up with a better drone and trying to come up with different solutions and standards. And also, this also ties into data security. I mean, I don't want to go back into that story yet, but also related. It's early days. I mean, it's an industry that's rapidly evolving. The tools are rapidly changing. I mean, the drones are getting better by the year, as we see. And companies are figuring out how to use them best. And yeah, there's still a lot of learning that needs to be done. And the regulation is still behind all these developments. So by the time that catches up, we're probably a couple of years ahead still.
I will say, I think 2020 is going to be a big year for the drone industry. 18 and 19 were not really big years. 16 and 17 were really the big years. And I think with this new evolution of drones that we're seeing, like from Skydio, I think we are going to see a new wave of excitement. I think we're going to see a new wave of drones. We're going to see a new, very niche style drones. And then we're going to see drones that can maybe fulfill a vast majority of use cases. In fact, we're already looking into one of those companies right now. In addition, in our last show about the drone wars, we didn't really talk about impossible aerospace. We didn't talk about how Tesla engineers are totally redesigning how drones are designed as a whole, utilizing the battery as the frame instead of, the frame around the battery.
That might be a whole show in itself.
It totally could be, because you solve many of the security issues with that drone. We have one particular client who's still having issues flying in restricted airspace, and that drone would solve the problem. It's American made, American components, American flight controller, like American. So
let's go.
I just have to say, just really quick, on this whole trade war thing, I think this division between China and America is having a ripple effect all over the world. I think it's having a ripple effect in divisiveness. I think it's making people question things. I think it's making people paranoid. And I think you're seeing a fundamental ideological shift on world relations and Haya. Even though, at the end of the day, everyone's like, well, we want to be first, whatever, whether it's China or the United States. At the end of the day, it's really a global economy. And at the end of the day, it benefits both of us to work together. Now, I understand that in order to sometimes get someone to pay attention, you kind of got to pinch them, right? Cause some pain to say, come to the table. And I realize that's what's going on right now. But in addition, I would say I think it has had many, many negative effects. Not a lot of real practical effects, but it's also opened the door for a lot of, other manufacturers to remain competitive in this industry.
Yeah.
So while it's maybe not a good thing and it's closed a lot of doors for people, it's also opened a lot of doors for other people.
Yeah,
and not just
in that
Americans.
sense, 2020 should become an interesting year for sure.
For sure. So for sure. Yeah. Also, what happens? How does the economy and the markets as a whole affect this whole thing?
Oh, that's a whole new show right there as well.
Yeah, because if you don't have a strong economy, people aren't spending money.
No, but I think also a lot of the breakthroughs that we see in how drones are being used come from companies that have pretty deep pockets. I mean, going back to Amazon, UPS, Google, even if times are tougher, those companies will probably still keep developing. And actually, maybe if drones are seen as a time saver or a labor saver, then drones might actually take flights even more so.
True. So true.
If you can do work faster, you can do it more efficiently, you can do it cheaper, then hey, the case for using drones becomes stronger and stronger.
Couldn't agree. So in a quick recap and wrap up of this week's episode of Off the Record, what are your 2020 predictions? 2 sentences or less.
I think we are going to see remote ID. That's my prediction. 2020, yes, and partly because I believe in it, but partly because I think it's a necessary step in the legislative process, and I hope they crack this one and we get to see it. That will be my hopeful prediction for the next year.
While it is hopeful, I'm going to be realistic and pragmatic and say we do not see remote ID implemented next year.
All right, well, let's see what happens.
Will it be passed? Maybe. Will it be implemented? Absolutely not.
If it passes, passes, you owe me a beer.
I will buy you a whole round of beers.
There you go.
Also, I think we're going to see more drone manufacturers taking power away from the powerhouse right now.
Yeah.
I also think that the Drone Security Act will not go through. I think that recreational laws are going. I think it's really difficult to predict what the future of recreational drone laws are because next year I don't really see any change. I just see an exacerbation of existing problems until remote ID does go into effect and until there is some way to actually enforce against egregious pilots. I think that hobbyist law is going to get worse and worse and worse. I don't think there's going to be any compliance. And while I don't think there's going to be any compliance, I don't think there's going to be any enforcement. And with that, I think we're going to see a divergence or a division between recreational pilots and Part 107 pilots, which is frankly really unfortunate because the only egregious stupid people I've ever seen were hobbyists. And yet, if you remember in the very early days of the FAA back in 2014, 2015, they said, oh no, the only people who are taking risks are those who are making money, because they have an incentive to take a risk. And I'm like,
No.
you do not know human psychology very well. Back to school.
Yeah, but you bring up an interesting point as well. Going back to the whole legislative process, if the rules of the game aren't changed fast enough, I mean, see what happens. DJI launches a product, the DJI Mavic Mini, that falls below the 250 gram threshold, and now in large parts of the world is a drone that's much easier to fly. So there's different ways to solve these problems. You can keep looking at the legislative process and say, hey, we need new laws, we need you guys to change these rules, we need remote ID, blah, 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 blah. You can also say, well, hey, let's develop a different drone that doesn't need to meet all those requirements. And I think the Mavic Mini is a great example of DJI going a different way.
It's kind of the same parallel as people saying, okay, 107, you're not going to allow drone delivery. Let's go 135.
Yeah, there you go. So if the case for drones is so obvious and so clear, people are going to find a way to get to where they need to be. Whether they change the product or they change the rules of the game, they'll get there.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to do it for this episode of Off the Record.